Good afternoon, all. This is Marianella Collado with Tobias Financial Advisors. We will be starting shortly. Give us a couple of more minutes. Thank you all for your patience. Good afternoon, all. Thank you for joining us for your Financial Life Cycle webinar this lovely afternoon. I am Marianella Collado. I'm a Senior Financial Advisor with Tobias Financial Advisor, and I'm here with my associate, Yesenia Ramirez, who's our Associate Financial Advisor.
Hello, everyone.
We will be walking you through the exciting cycle of both financial planning and your life and things to consider. One of the things that we'll just note before we begin the presentation is that we're going to be talking about general stages in people's lives and main transitions that we all experience. The facts and circumstances in each individual case are going to vary. So as we mention things, these are just more food for thought, and if you feel that something is applicable to you, it's always best that you consult with your financial advisor, call any one of us in the office, or your CPA. But we hope that you find it informative as we cover some of these general topics and main planning opportunities. We covered who we are. Again, Marianella. Everyone calls me Nella in the office, and Yesenia. But of course, we work as a team at Tobias, so you can call any one of us, and we're all available to answer any of your questions. The main goal with these webinars is to hopefully educate, provide a little bit more education, but also just pique interest on different things that, maybe you haven't discussed with us and we should be thinking about that might be beneficial to you. So what are we going to cover today? First, we'll cover what is the financial life cycle. We actually, Yesenia and I came up with 4 main cycles in a financial life. Then we're going to cover the different stages of the financial life cycle. We're going to cover main stages, or what I think are main financial transition period, where there's so much going on and so much that should be considered and reviewed so that you don't have any missed opportunities. So that's going to be the focus, is at every stage in our lives, what are the things that are affecting us and what are the things that we should be looking at during each stage. And I'll point out before we jump into this is that you do have a chat feature. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, if you look at your registration screen, you should have a screen on the right-hand side of the presentation, and you're able to enter any questions you may have. We'll try to address them all at the end. We plan to cover this in about 45 minutes to leave enough time for some of your questions. So feel free to ask any questions.
And if it's hiding for you, there should be a vertical bar. If it's hidden for you, there should be an arrow that you can open, and you'll be able to find the chat feature there to answer your questions throughout the presentation.
Excellent. So what is the financial life cycle? Essentially, depending on our age, there are, I'm going to say, 3 main stages that we're in. Initially, as we're in our teens, we'll stay in our teens. Maybe before we even get our first job or in school, we start building a foundation. We start building those financial habits that are going to shape what we do with the wealth that we earn later on. It's just, and this starts early on. Even we think when we have little kids, what can we be doing to start educating them and teaching them the value of money? But these, in your early years, you're really building that foundation and developing those healthy financial habits. Then, as you enter the workforce, you start going into the wealth accumulation phase. This is, you start your first job, you start getting raises, you're really thinking about just accumulation. I go back to the whole rule of paying yourself first. This is that concept. This is the phase you're in while you're thinking about all the hard work and paying yourself first before your money, you can't tell where it's going. So it's the whole concept of paying yourself first. After you've worked so hard, we go into a distribution phase or retirement. We say that some people don't like to use the word retirement because they're not exactly retiring, but they are maybe supporting their lifestyle with all the wealth that they've accumulated throughout the years. What we're going to cover is essentially what does it mean each phase of the financial life cycle. As we said, building that foundation is the whole concept of developing healthy financial habits, establishing goals. When you're younger, the goals might be smaller, but they're still goals, and it's getting into the habit of establishing those goals and working towards them and accomplishing them. As you get older and your income is larger, those goals start expanding, and hopefully you've already built the habit of doing that. Then the wealth accumulation we talked about, this is really, you get into it as 35 to 65 before we enter the distribution phase. Distribution phase, that's going to be a critical time to work with your financial advisor to manage that. There's so many components of what you need to consider when you're in the distribution phase. Where are the funds coming from? How is it most efficient to pull out those distributions? Determining if the portfolio is properly designed to support that lifestyle. We're living a lot longer now. Retirement is not 10 or 15 years. It could be 30, 40 years because of where our health system is and the advances in science. And then finally, while you're in that distribution or retirement mode, you start thinking about what sort of a legacy you'd like to leave behind, and whether that's supporting charitable causes or making sure that wealth is passed on to your children also in a tax-efficient way. I say this is your ability to control things after the grave. This is the whole ability to still have a say in where things are going after you're gone. The main stages that Yesenia is going to start walking us through, again, we're covering some of the main transitions. It doesn't mean that everyone is following the same path in this order, or not everyone is interested in having kids. And so we're going to talk about main transition periods. Some may apply to you, some may not, and it could be a whole gamut of variations of what different transitions could be for you. But we'll cover these main topics, and hopefully it'll raise some interesting questions. And I'm going to pass it off to Yesenia, who's going to start with starting college.
So here, starting college is where we're going to start building that financial foundation. It's going to be the way that young kids, either in their late teens or early 20s, are going to start developing those financial habits that are going to last them throughout their lifetime. The first important step we would say that's important for someone who's college age is to learn budgeting, either with an allowance or with part-time employment income that they're earning on their own. This way they start learning the value of money. They start developing those skills to see how much income they have coming in and how much can they reasonably spend. And as a result of that, how much can they save for those goals that they're going to develop for themselves, whether it's I want to to go to spring break. How can I save for that? And parents, you are going to be instrumental in helping your kids develop these skills at a young age. Let's say you do give them an allowance, making sure that allowance stays steady. If they overspend 1 month, how are they going to adjust next month to continue living that lifestyle?
So I see this stage as almost the training wheels. You know, giving them an opportunity to think about how much cash they have available and how they're going to budget that based on their needs for meals, books, whatever else they have to cover. So it's and some parents say, I want a full ride. I don't want my kids to worry about how they're going to pay for college or their dorm, and that's fine. But you also, if they're leaving, going away for college, give them that opportunity to start learning what it's like to adult, right?
The new term, adulting. And there's actually a lot of different ways that kids can start learning how to do that. Kids in college, they love their technology. There's actually a program called Mint.com where they could start tracking all of their expenses and start budgeting. It's a great tool for them to start learning. And another area that they should really start developing is credit. We recommend that at this age, students should start researching different credit cards and just use one credit card for all of their purchases that they use to pay off each month. So they'll be treating it as a debit card, not spending more than they have, but they are building that credit so that down the line, when they're ready to start purchasing a home, they've already established a long enough credit history. That way mom and dad don't have to come in and co-sign a home mortgage while they're in retirement. So this way you're helping your child develop their independence while creating those healthy financial habits. Next on our list is health and financial powers of attorney. Even though your child is still your child, you'll be the first person they contact in the unfortunate event of an accident. Let's say your child is unable to make decisions on their own. Even though you'll make a decision today, there's a need for a health power of attorney. That means with privacy laws, even though they're your child, they're over 18 and their health information is protected. So even though you would be making decisions, they wouldn't necessarily share that health information for you, which of course would create a huge disaster if you couldn't know what was going on with your child.
Yeah, HIPAA laws are really strict, and we've actually seen some cases where our clients' kids are away in college. They're going through some, it's stressful. It's a stressful time. Everything's new. They're on their own. They're away from home. And so, not only are they stressed with the burden of keeping up with the curriculum, but everything's so stressful at that time. We've had a client who the child was going through some therapy, mental issues, and they weren't sharing it with the parents just because there was nothing in place to allow the school to share or the hospital to share with the parents. And this could have been a situation where it could have saved the kid's life because it didn't end so well. So this, I'd say, is first order of business. You have your 18, 19-year-old heading off to college, is have some simple documents that allow the schools, their bank accounts, whatever they're doing, allow them to speak with you because you're a power of attorney holder. You're their agent.
Next up on our building the foundation stage is once you've acquired a new job. Again, you're going to be practicing those same skills of managing your expenses, looking at your cash flow, and making sure you live within your means and still saving. In addition to that, at this point, a student may have some debt. They may have taken on some student loans, or they didn't hear this webinar and they decided to put a lot of money on their credit card. So this is going to be a really important time to start paying down those credit cards, especially the ones with really high interest, and start paying down those student loans. Now that you have a steady income stream with your new job, the really important thing to do is going to be establishing an emergency savings. This is going to be cash that you just have set aside. We usually recommend between 3 to 6 months of expenses that you have in a high yield savings account. In case something does happen, you have that cash ready on hand.
Right, and this goes back to just that whole concept of training yourself to pay yourself first. So setting aside, carving out just a portion of your pay, no matter what the pay is. Just if you make, $50,000 a year, or $1,000 a week, or carve out a small portion of that, and then just train yourself to just put some of that aside. And that becomes important, right, to have that emergency savings if they really beef up the next item, which is the 401k.
Exactly. So when you start a new job, most employers are going to offer 401k, and many of them will offer a company match, which means if you put aside a certain percentage of your income towards a 401k, the company will match as much as you're contributing. We'll say generally it's about 5%. So if there is a company match, we highly recommend that you contribute at least that match. Otherwise, it's just money you're throwing away. It's money that the company is willing to give you just to ensure that you're saving for yourself.
And there, the one thing is when you make an election to participate in that employer-provided 401k, you're going to have to make some decisions, or your child will have to make some decisions on how they want to invest within that 401k. That would be a good time to reach out to us so that we can help them pick a portfolio that's appropriate. We've seen that where we had our client's daughter. We started working with her and looked at the 401k her husband had and noticed that it was 100% in a bond fund, and the gentleman was in his early 30s. So that's not a good way to start, because time is on your side. You're in your early 20s, late 20s. Time is on your side. So that's really the time to take advantage of investing.
Exactly. And along with the 401k, your employer is going to offer other benefits such as life, disability, health insurance. We definitely recommend you take a look at those in depth. Especially for life and disability, employers will offer it at a much cheaper rate than if you try to find a policy on the open market. If you're over the age of 26, you're no longer eligible to be on your parents' health insurance, so you can see what kind of options are available. Building up your own skills as an employee, looking at tuition reimbursement programs, continuing education, taking advantage of any programs that your company offers is going to help you develop those skills and increase your wealth over time as you grow in your career.
And I think that's critical, because you make yourself more marketable.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think, taking advantage of these programs, whether they have, you can get your master's, go for your MBA, and it's covered by your employer. I mean, that's a huge win to just, be able to develop yourself personally.
And then looking ahead, many people nowadays don't stay in their first job. Changing jobs has become a more recurring theme. So when you do change your job, you're going to have a few options to look at. Your 401k, for instance, you've been pumping all this money into your 401k. Now that you changed jobs, what can you do? One of your options is you could roll it over into your new employer's 401k. You can roll it over into a traditional IRA, or you can leave it there. This is one of your decisions that you'll want to speak to your financial advisor. Call us, and we'll help you walk through your different options.
And it all depends, right? Because some employers say, oh, no, you're not going to be allowed to keep it. I think if it's under a certain balance, they just force you to move it out. So, again, looking at those options, and that's one of the things as fiduciary advisors that we have to really focus on is, what will the recommendation be, because what is in your best interest? So rather than blindly saying, oh, go ahead and roll that thing into an annuity, which happens to so many people who fall prey to some annuity salespeople, that may not necessarily be the best option. So you have to just consider what is going to be the cost of this new platform if you roll it over versus what you have available in your current plan. So that's something that you have to look at carefully. And COBRA is another thing. If, depending, you may be offered the ability to stay on the former employer's health insurance for a period of 18 months. It all depends. And again, that's another time where you're going to evaluate what is being offered by my new employer versus my former employer. This is a big transition period. Everything is so fresh. So this is a good time to call us to kind of walk you through all the ins and outs.
And now, moving on to our next stage of wealth accumulation, we're going to focus on different major life events that can occur during this stage. Marriage is definitely one of these. It's a really exciting time. It's the beginning of a life together, and as such, with such a big change, it's also going to change your finances. What you spent so much time developing your individual plan, what's your individual goals, how you're going to get there, and now you have this other person in the mix, and you have to figure out how to really marry your goals and make a plan that's going to work for both of you in the long run. Today, we've noticed that that divorce many times it comes from money problems. It comes from couples not really speaking about what their money habits are. They're not really on the same page with their goals. They're not aligned. And so we think that before you decide to get married, discussing those spending habits is really going to be crucial. Does somebody work better with a credit card? Do they have a lot of credit card debt? Maybe they work with cash. Just understanding their habits, how they spend, how they save is going to be crucial to just being on the same page down the line. And
I think that's critical because, well, everyone often says money doesn't necessarily make you happy, and that's not why you get married. I hope not, but certainly it could be one of the main catalysts for issues or straining the marriage if you're not on the same page. And this goes back to of you sitting together and making sure that there's an alignment of goals, an alignment of vision, and what it is the two of you wish to accomplish together. Same page about buying a house, having children, like all these little things. You have to make sure that you're kind of on the same page. You may not know it all in the beginning, but you sort of know how the other person handles money and their psychology of money.
Exactly. And just starting those conversations, it's not going to be a topic that you avoid, especially money being such a huge topic in any person's life, really, and just being on that same page. Another thing you'll want to discuss are any liabilities. You'll want to know your partners if they have any kind of debt, whether it's student loans, whether they have other credit cards, properties, maybe whether they already own a home or investment properties. These are things that you're going to marry onto that debt, and you want to decide, is this something that you're ready for, if you want to take that leap. So it's definitely a conversation to have before you get married. Another thing to look at is whether you want to do joint or individual accounts. Again, this is spending habits. How are you going to split joint expenses of a home looking down the line? Just being on the same page as to how you want to spend together. We recommend looking at wedding costs well in advance of the actual wedding. Some people are fortunate enough to have their parents pay for the wedding, but today many couples are taking on that cost. And you'll want to see how much time you have to save, how the costs are going to be split. That way there's no surprises down the line once the wedding date is fastly approaching. And you also want to consider some prenuptial agreements.
And this could be a sensitive topic.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, depending on the wealth that one of the individuals might already have, sometimes they just don't have a choice, right? This is something that mom and dad is requiring them to do. So this could be a sensitive issue, but also just having that partner that's open to discussing all of these things and something that's not a surprise that can eventually cause a problem in the marriage. What I'll say too is, people need to consider, and you don't want to go into a marriage thinking, well, what if I get divorced? That's definitely not what we want to happen here. But again, you never know. Life changes, things happen. Just being aware that assets you have before the marriage, those are not really marital assets at that point until you combine them all. So it's important to think about what's there before the marriage and how the two of you will kind of combine your two financial lives. And after the wedding, we'll have a lot of homework to do.
Yes, so you'll have a checklist after the wedding. One of them is to look at account beneficiaries. Any of your individual accounts, you'll probably want to add your spouse as the main account beneficiary. Even on joint accounts, we recommend having some sort of transfer on death on that account. Even though one of you may pass away, it'll go to the other spouse. You do have to consider the fact that there may be an accident where something happens to both of you. Who would you like your accounts to go to in that event? At this point, you may want to start looking at some life insurance, health, and other property insurance if you decide to purchase a home together. With life insurance, one of the spouses may be working or both spouses are working. In this case, you've married your financial lives. You have to consider the event where, what if you lose one of those income streams? Can your surviving spouse pay for that house that you were both living in? And that's where life insurance is going to be vital.
Right, and I mean, filing status, once you get married, should you file jointly? Should you file separately? There's so many moving parts that definitely needs to be evaluated with your financial advisor, CPA, so that before you just blindly go ahead and file a joint return, make sure that that's what makes sense. So there's a lot of things to be considered right after the wedding, and not what we need to do immediately, but maybe a couple weeks after you get back from the honeymoon, we'll jump on.
We'll give you a few weeks though. Moving on to the next major event, after you get married, you may want to consider starting a family. Just to put this in the context of our stage, this is still in the wealth accumulation stage. You're both working, but maybe you've decided that you want to take on that decision of creating a family, having children, or maybe you just have a wonderful surprise on your way. And it may never feel like it's the right time, but once you make that decision, we think it's a wonderful idea, and there's just a lot of things to do to plan for that.
Well, that is a tax deduction. We'll just start there. So that's plus number one.
And so starting with health insurance, if you're married, you may want to look at your spouse's health insurance, see what kind of
coverages, right? Your employer health insurance versus your spouse's health insurance, and see which, you may have already picked a pediatrician. Which plan covers that pediatrician, what are the benefits of one versus the other before you just add the child to one policy or the other.
Exactly. Again, look at some work benefits, looking at maternity leave and paternity leave, making the decision whether you want to stay at home, have a spouse stay at home to care for the child in the home, or if you want to look at child care. Again, this is going to bring in that budgeting and see which is the best decision for you and your situation.
Right. You may find that child care might be, offset the income that you could be making. That's how expensive child care can be. So that's one of the things you'll want to evaluate. Does it make sense for the spouse to keep working if child care is just as costly?
Exactly. And this is also a good time to review your estate plan now that you have heirs. You can list your child's name, and if you continue to have children down the line, you could mention that in your documents that you would like to transfer to heirs.
Right, and the most important part there too is now you have a minor child that you're responsible for. So should something happen to both parents, naming that guardianship, and also if there's substantial wealth that could pass on to the child, considering trust and a trustee to manage that for the child.
And again, here life insurance plays a big part. If you consider the situation where you lose one of the spouse's income, how will the surviving spouse continue not only to pay for their lifestyle but for their child as well, and maintaining your family if something were to happen to you.
Right. So with every stage, we do tend to revisit life insurance, because maybe when it's just the two of you, you have life insurance maybe to just pay off the mortgage so the surviving spouse doesn't have to. Maybe you needed the two incomes to pay that mortgage. So maybe when it's just the two of you, you have insurance to just pay the mortgage and a couple of other outstanding debts or whatever else. Child comes along, now you need to probably bump up that life insurance because you need to have income replacements, or, be able to cover the cost of child care if the mom is staying home. Now, all of a sudden, something happens to mom, somebody needs to care for the child and clean the home, which you had brought up.
Yeah. And again, we'll look at college saving strategies. Once the child is born, a very common call we get is, how do we save for college? The best time to start is as early as possible.
As soon as they get the Social Security number.
There we go. A few days after. So you would just call us and we'll help you work through a good college saving strategy and see what will work for you and your family. And now moving on to, unfortunately, planning for divorce. This isn't something that anybody ever expects to go through. However, not only will it take a personal and emotional toll if this does happen, but it's also going to have a huge impact on your finances. And we recommend the moment this has been decided, get professionals involved, not only just your attorney, but also getting a financial advisory team to help you. Divorce is not just splitting a line down the middle, and it's something that it really takes a lot of planning. There's tax implications.
And I think it's a time when you're probably at your foggiest. You know, you might not be thinking straight, emotions get in the way, and so having a team of professionals who are thinking, you know, hopefully helping you think through things so that you don't make any angry decisions would be probably the most important part of the divorce process.
And, you know, the moment this has been decided, seek out your advisors, and also just getting a clear understanding of the financial picture. Again, emotions do get in the way, but you may want to consider, I haven't been working for the past 15 years. How am I going to live off of this income? Or going forward, do I get a job? What kind of assets do I have? Do I own this home? Will I be able to continue living in that home? Maybe it needed 2 incomes to maintain. So there's just going to be a lot of understanding what the entire picture is.
And I think you raised a good point, too, because, you know, you said you don't just draw a line down the middle and go 50-50. Wife, you keep the house, I'll keep all the brokerage accounts, right? I mean, can wife afford to maintain the house without the husband?
And afford those real estate taxes.
Right, and so it's not the same to just say house is worth $1 million, portfolio is worth $1 million, you keep the house, I take the portfolio. That may not work. So I think this is when you need a real team to kind of help you think through what is best for you.
And then looking down, while you're in the middle of the divorce, there's going to be a lot of negotiations. It's not just assets now. There's also other considerations such as alimony versus child support. Nella, would you like to speak a little to the tax implications of those?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this is one of the things that your legal team is going to be instrumental in helping you negotiate. There's a big difference between alimony and child support. I mean, alimony represents taxable income to the recipient. So for the person who will receive the income stream from the ex-spouse, you probably prefer that it be child support because it's not taxable income. But the person that's making the payment will prefer that it be alimony because it's a deduction for them. So these are all things to consider and sort of reach some sort of an agreement, something that works out for you and the ex-spouse as well. But you definitely just want a team on your side to, throughout each point of negotiation, they're explaining to you why you would want that or why you wouldn't, and see if there's another angle.
Exactly. Having that third party involved is really going to help make the best decision for you in your situation. And then once papers have been drawn up and now you're living separate from your ex-spouse, there's still some more work to do. You want to review your estate plan. What was joint is now again single, and you want to see how you want to distribute your assets. Maybe look at your guardianship again.
And I think the worst that can happen there is maybe you had a few IRAs, other accounts, and you had your spouse named as the primary beneficiary. You probably want to go back and redo all those things. You don't want an ex-spouse being a transfer on death recipient for an account that was in your name. So this is the time to really do a full overhaul. I mean, you're just going to review everything and clean up what needs to be cleaned up. But on life insurance, I'll mention one of the things that usually, and this is something your divorce attorney will probably be very instrumental in, is negotiating that there be a life insurance policy on the person, on the ex-spouse, so that, you know, you want to protect that income stream. If something happens to the ex-spouse, well, there goes your alimony. So these are things that have to also be considered. And Social Security benefits is one of the things that often is overlooked. If you're married, you were married for more than 10 years, you could be entitled to benefits on the ex-spouse's credit. So it's something that, again, we would help you kind of think through, because if you remarry, that could change that particular benefit. So again, it's important that you kind of think through all of the different options.
And now moving into a different financial life stage, we're going to look at distribution or retirement. This is the time that we spent so much of our lives focusing on putting away into our 401ks, saving in our IRAs, and now you've decided you're ready to stop working full time. And this is probably one of the more challenging stages of our life, because we're no longer relying on a steady income stream to fund our lifestyle.
This is the best part for us, because this is where we have fun. We sit with you and we walk you through what life is going to look like post-retirement. And this is where you leave our office, hopefully, with that peace of mind, because I did it right. I did everything right. I'm ready to do this in 5 years or whatever the time horizon is. Yeah,
and just knowing that the lifestyle that you've built for yourself, that you'll be able to maintain no matter how long you live, that's something we take into consideration when we look at retirement projections. We keep pushing it down up to like 99 years old, 100. Some clients say, no, I'm not going to live that long. But it's really becoming much more common. But knowing that even if you live that long, it'll really give you peace of mind knowing that everything that you've built throughout your life can help you continue living your lifestyle throughout retirement.
Right, and there's so many things that are going to come into play at this stage. We want to go into retirement with as little to no debt, so that's going to be instrumental, is focusing on paying down that mortgage, because that's something that you just don't want that little dark cloud over your head.
You also want to look at your employer retirement benefits and payout options. Perhaps you have some stock options or pension benefits. You'll want to look at your different options, work with a financial advisor, see, can I split up these stock options so I don't get it all in 1 year and pay a huge amount of taxes on it? Maybe I can spread it out throughout a few years.
And also the pension. Pension is big, right? Because you have so many. I mean, we've seen some where it's like 20 different payout options. Single life, joint life. So this is one of the things you want to think about. Do I take a lump sum? Which option makes the most sense? So there's going to be a lot to consider there.
You also want to look at your different health insurance options. At 66, you'll be eligible for Medicare and different supplemental coverages. Once you're no longer working, you're no longer eligible for your employer's health care, so you'll have to see how Medicare works and if you do need supplemental coverage for your needs. We'll also recommend looking at the need and the cost of long-term care plans. An illness during retirement can be devastating to your wealth if you don't have a long-term care plan. So we will recommend taking a look at those and seeing if it is suitable for you.
And then Social Security, that's not one of those things where you just, as soon as you're eligible, you claim it. It'll be thinking through whether you need that cash flow and how can we maximize those benefits. And usually most of us know that if we wait till 70, that's where we really maximize our Social Security benefits. But there's so many moving parts, like your health, that may change the recommendation. So there's a lot here, and we'll walk you through each particular item that needs to be considered. And I think what's most important is that some things have deadlines, some things don't, and we just don't want to miss the opportunities with those things that we can't go back and redo. So this is something unfortunately we have to deal with often, and there's going to be so much to think about here. If you work with a financial advisor, it's going to be hopefully a lot easier because you've kind of already sorted through everything. You know exactly what's going to happen when your spouse passes away, and you have a team to kind of walk you through what do we need to do next. After we get through the grieving process, we have to jump on cleaning up a lot of things, changing all the beneficiary designations, reviewing what life insurance policies are out there and claiming them. How are we going to invest those? Reviewing all our insurance policies, whose name are they under? reviewing all our estate planning documents and revising them, you know, making sure we have successor trustee's name, because maybe it was first your spouse and then your child. Well, spouse is no longer here. We just need a successor to the child. And I think the two key points here for us to make sure we don't lose sight of is the fact that we have some big decisions to make from an estate planning standpoint. There's this whole concept called portability, and it's one of the things you'll have to absolutely evaluate is if your spouse didn't transfer assets to another individual, not the surviving spouse, did they use up their estate tax exemption? And if they didn't, how can we maximize on the opportunity to transfer that over to the surviving spouse if needed? And it's really going to be something that we walk you through and say, all right, here's the cost of filing an estate tax return, and the benefit is we take their full exemption, which is going to cover all of the assets you pass on to your kids. So it's a lot of things to think through. Your deceased spouse IRA, you don't want to just blindly roll it over, because as a spouse you can do that. I mean, we had a situation where the deceased spouse was actually younger than the surviving spouse, so we chose not to roll it over because the distributions didn't have to start until a later year than if the spouse had rolled it over. So these are all things that definitely have to be considered before you kind of just go through the checklist and just do what you think you're supposed to do, because you want to consider all the pieces to the puzzle is how I call it. And in that year, you have to think about income tax planning, believe it or not. It's what are some of the things what carryovers do I have? Capital loss carryovers, charitable contribution carryovers that might expire in that final year, in the final income tax year. So you want to be able to maximize the ability to use up those carryovers. And there's so much that can be done, and it's working with your CPA to make sure that you don't miss those opportunities, because once the year comes to a close, unfortunately, you can't go back and take advantage of those carryovers because they do expire with the taxpayer. There's a lot to think about, and that's going to be a rough time. So hopefully we'll be here to walk you through all that, and it won't feel as overwhelming. And finally, the stage on, where you get to think about what sort of a legacy you want to leave behind and what are some of the values you want to instill on your children and their children. So this is going to be an exciting time to think about what are your charitable inclinations. What are some of the causes that are important to you that you'd like to make sure that you take care of in your will or start planning beforehand, whether that be setting up a private foundation, a donor-advised fund, and involving the whole family so that you're all part of this. I used to work with a family where every year they funded a donor-advised fund to the tune of, let's say, $100,000, and they had 5 kids. And what they did is they said, we just funded it. Here, family, let's sit around the table and let's all talk about what causes are important to you. And I'm going to earmark a portion of it for you to pick charities of your choice. And this is a nice way to start instilling those values of giving back and involving the whole family. But also, there's a lot to think about in terms of passing on wealth. We'll want to review all the beneficiary designations, evaluate our children's behavior. Now we've seen them mature. They're now adults. And we see what choices they make with their money. And this way we get to think about whether they should receive their wealth outright or they need to be protected from themselves or a potential future daughter-in-law or son-in-law. So this is some of the things that at this stage we'll start thinking through and make sure that we clean up so that there are no surprises. We actually had a situation where it wasn't our client, it was a friend of our client's, and she said, my husband just passed away and he had a son from a prior marriage, and the son unfortunately had a drug addiction problem, and because of that, her husband tried to retitle everything, change all the beneficiary designations, but he forgot that he had set up a trust and had an account in the name of that trust. And when he passed away, the exact thing he didn't want to happen happened, and it was that some assets were passed along to the child with the drug addiction, and that was obviously not his intention. So this, as you see your family grow and develop, you have time to massage things and change things. So this is a fun part where we get involved in helping you transfer wealth, taking advantage of annual exclusion gifts, and depending on the level of the value of your total estate, we can get very sophisticated with other planning techniques, but that's probably way beyond the scope of this presentation, because Yesenia and I were saying we could probably spend 45 minutes on each of these topics. So we did our best to kind of cover generally, and maybe that's a good idea. Maybe we have like series. The next one could be just starting cut, a whole series on starting cut.
I think we're set up for the next few years, you know, what we're covering.
So we're going to conclude the presentation and open this up for questions. Let's just see what questions we have available here. We have a couple of questions so far.
All right. So from one of our viewers, they asked, should I update my estate documents after having each child if I have multiple children?
That's a good question. Yeah, we get that a lot. I think the first time, or the first main period to update your estate planning documents, your will, the trust, if you have one, is with the birth of the first child, right? Because now everything's changing. You go from just a family of 2 to a family of 3, and that's where you really need to start revamping your will to include a guardianship. So that's going to be the #1 reason to change or update your estate documents when you have your first child, is to name a guardian, have a guardianship designation, and probably consider creating a trust in that will so that any of the assets that the minor child is inheriting is in trust. You'll have to pick a trustee. So you don't have to do it after every child, because that first set of documents can say, to my firstborn X and whatever other children we have and any of our other descendants. And then probably the next time will be after you've finished having children. Now you know you just have 3 children. You're done at that point, and you'll probably want to name them, you know, so that there's no child coming from somewhere else saying, "Hey, that was my dad." But I would say maybe when you have the first child, and then the rule of thumb, and most attorneys will say this, is that these documents have a shelf life of about 5 to 10 years. And anything, like if there's a change in law, well, it's going to be sooner, because all of a sudden the documents don't match the current law. And let's see what other questions.
All right, so we have another question here. If I'm getting divorced and my spouse and I use the same advisor, should I seek a new one?
That's a really good question. I think if you're working with an advisor, good advisor is going to most likely just recommend that they can't represent you and your future ex-spouse, because that's just going to be a conflict of interest. And nobody wants to be put in that position. So you may have a choice. Maybe you stay with the same firm, but maybe you have a different lead advisor if you're comfortable with that. Oftentimes what ends up happening is that the husband is the one that has a relationship with their advisor, and maybe the spouse doesn't, so the spouse ends up finding a new advisor. So that's most likely you'll be finding a new advisor, or if you're comfortable splitting it, depending. If a big firm, I used to work for a big trust company, and when there was a divorce, we try to just split the advisor on that account.
Great.
Oh, here's another one. I'm married. I have many different investment brokerage accounts set up. Should these be opened up as an individual account with her as a beneficiary, or a joint account? This may be a case-by-case question. That's a good point. We live in Florida, so one of the main things that we'll usually talk about when you have a married couple is the power of liability protection that's associated with a joint account that's tenants by the entirety. In most cases, if you're happily married and there's no issue that husband or wife can do anything that's against what again, there's a whole alignment of goals and values. We would recommend that it be joint tenants by the entirety, and that's something, again, that once you work through your estate plan with an attorney, you can think through the whole different variations of how you can title assets, because if you end up creating a revocable trust, and again, if you're a doc, there's so many things to consider. If you are in a profession where there's some risk of a lawsuit, then you're going to move things around and change the titling. But joint tenants by the entirety does have a powerful liability protection aspect to it. So we do like to see joint tenants by the entirety. Any other questions here?
You touched briefly on Social Security. Is there a general age at which I should apply for Social Security?
Yeah, I mean, the general rule will always be that you try waiting as long as possible. 70 is when those benefits stop growing. So if you can wait till 70 because they are growing at 8% per year, it's a huge benefit. We would recommend you wait. But there's so many things that are going to come into play. For instance, your health. If you're not, if you have a history of folks dying a little earlier or a little prematurely, then it may not be so wise to wait till 70, because there is a break-even point where the benefits that you would have started at full retirement age, 65, 66, then crosses over if you had waited till 70. So it all depends, and this is why we always run different models and say, well, what do you think? If you think you're going to live till 80, nobody has a crystal ball. But if we think we're going to live till 80, 85, then maybe we just start earlier.
We'll ask you how you're feeling at that point.
Yeah.
How healthy do you feel?
So I think any more questions here? Let me see. Okay, we don't have any other questions here. I hope that this presentation was helpful to all of you. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to us or any one of us in the office.
We definitely encourage it. This is meant to be food for thought. There's so many topics we could have covered. If there's any one topic we didn't cover that applies to you, we do encourage you to reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to walk you through your personal situation.
Thank you for joining us. This has been fun, and till next quarter. I think we have one coming up next quarter.
So keep an eye out for that email.
All right. Take care.